The Renaissance, a golden age of art and genius, or so the history books say. But behind the masterpieces, life was brutal, messy, and full of intrigue. Poisoned wine, backstabbing nobles, and betrayals were everywhere. Welcome to Renaissance Italy. Keep your food taster close. It's going to be a bumpy ride. At the heart of Renaissance Florence's power games was the Medici family. Bankers turned rulers, weaving a web that caught popes, kings, and artists alike. Cosimo de Medici, the family patriarch, faced scandal and intrigue, solving problems the Medici way, with strategic marriages and bold moves. Enter Pietro, his troublesome son, a walking disaster, perfect for Cosimo's latest scheme. The stage was set for another Medici power play. Every tragedy needs a victim, and every reality show needs a contestant you can root for, even if you know they're doomed. Enter Leonora of Toledo, young, charming, and utterly unprepared for the Medici court. She was a pawn in a dangerous game. A lamb led to a well-decorated slaughterhouse. The ink on her marriage contract was barely dry, but the script for this tragedy was already written in blood. In the Medici world, survival meant everything. There were no rules, only the drive to win, to stay alive, and in power. Loyalty was fleeting, trust was fatal, and even your bedfellow could be your enemy. For Leonora, trapped in a golden cage, every move was watched, every word judged. In this world of scandal and power, not everyone would make it out alive. Cosimo de Medici, once a dashing prince, now a weary ruler, faced a scandal, his interest in his late wife's niece, Leonora. In Florence, perception was everything, and Cosimo needed a plan. The solution? Marry Leonora off, turning a personal problem into a political move, Medici style. Enter Pietro de Medici, a chaotic, self-destructive force, infamous for his temper and vices. For Cosimo, he was a headache and a scandal magnet, so why not make him the solution? Marrying Pietro to Leonora would quash rumors and maybe force him to grow up, and so Pietro became the chosen groom, whether he liked it or not. Leonora of Toledo arrived in Florence, paraded at court like a prize filly, valued for her beauty, lineage, and Spanish ties. She was the perfect pawn. In the glittering, treacherous world of the Medici, her fate was sealed by powerful men, her dreams absent from the equation. Leonora, the Spanish pawn, was about to be moved into her final fatal position. In July 1571, Leonora of Toledo, just 16, was married to Pietro de Medici. The city celebrated, but beneath the grand spectacle, Leonora's fate was sealed. This was no fairy tale. She was now Medici property, her freedom lost. The wedding bells tolled not for joy but for the end of her old life. The honeymoon period, that blissful phase of early marriage, was for Leonora and Pietro, predictably, non-existent. Their new home was the Palazzo Pitti, a colossal, imposing fortress of a palace that was less of a home and more of a gilded prison. Here, Leonora was installed, surrounded by luxury but stripped of liberty. Her every move was watched. Her ladies-in-waiting were not just companions, they were spies, reporting back to her husband or her father-in-law. The palace, with its sprawling gardens and priceless art, became her cage, and her husband Pietro was the ever-present, unpredictable jailer. Life with Pietro quickly devolved into a nightmare. He was, by all reports, a deeply unpleasant husband. He was either completely absent, off carousing and racking up debts, or he was present and terrifying, prone to fits of jealous rage over the slightest perceived provocation. The affection and companionship that Leonora might have hoped for were replaced by a toxic mixture of neglect and control. He was a man consumed by his own demons, his paranoia twisting every innocent gesture into an act of betrayal. Living with him must have been like living on the slopes of a dormant volcano, never knowing when the next eruption of fury would come. This was the reality of the Medici matchmaking mayhem. A young woman's life had been sacrificed for political expediency, and the consequences were immediate and brutal. Leonora was trapped. She was a Medici now, and the family did not take kindly to public displays of unhappiness. To the outside world, she had to maintain the facade of the dutiful, contented wife. She had to smile at banquets, wear the fabulous gowns, and play her part in the grand Medici theatre, all while her spirit was being slowly crushed behind the palace walls. It was a masterclass in psychological torture, dressed up in velvet and jewels. The grand plan to settle Pietro had failed spectacularly. Marriage hadn't tamed him. It had just given him a new victim to torment. He continued his dissolute lifestyle with gusto, showing his young wife nothing but contempt. For Leonora, the vibrant, hopeful girl from Spain, the dream of a life in Florence had curdled into a daily struggle for survival. The matchmaking had been a success from Cosimo's perspective. The scandal was averted, the alliance was secured, but for Leonora, the mayhem was just beginning. She was now a permanent resident in the antechamber of hell, and the main event was yet to come. Leonora was a Medici in name, palace, and marriage, but her husband Pietro ignored her, leaving her isolated in a gilded cage. Her days were filled with loneliness, surrounded by riches that only mocked her solitude. Pietro was the negligent jailer, locking her away and forgetting she existed. In the intrigue-filled Florentine court, Leonora's unmet needs made her vulnerable to sparks of forbidden attention. Into this emotional desert walked Alessandro Gaggi, a dashing knight of St. Stephen. He noticed the sad young Duchess, Leonora, and offered her a brief escape with flirtatious glances and whispered words. But in the Medici court, nothing was innocent. Pietro, her jealous husband, noticed, and the light-hearted game turned cold and dangerous overnight. The first act of Leonora's search for affection was about to end, abruptly and bizarrely. Just as the drama peaked, Alessandro Gaggi, once a dashing cavalier, suddenly renounced the world for a monk's habit. The court was skeptical. This was no divine calling, but a well-placed threat from Pietro de Medici. Leonora watched in despair as her only comfort was forced away, realizing her gilded cage was now smaller than ever. After the Gaggi incident, you'd think Leonora would give up. But she tried again, this time with a dashing Frenchman, Francino. Their secret letters and stolen glances soon became a real affair, one her paranoid husband, Pietro, was determined to uncover. He intercepted their love notes, gathering proof for revenge. The final act of this doomed romance was about to begin. With a fistful of incriminating love letters, Pietro plotted with theatrical cunning. A duel was staged to exile Francino, his wife's lover, to Elba, isolated and vulnerable. Pietro's men kidnapped Francino, who was strangled in secret. His body vanished, and Leonora's grief sealed her fate. Pietro's paper trail of paranoia was now complete. After days of weeping, Leonora received a chilling invitation from her husband. Join him at his country villa for her health. Everyone knew what it meant. No one was fooled by the pretense. Leonora, trapped, had no choice but to accept, RSVPing yes to her own demise. Faced with the grim certainty of her fate, Leonora made one final, desperate plea. She asked for a single night's delay. She wanted one last evening with her infant son, Cosimo. It was a heart-wrenching request, the last wish of a condemned woman. Perhaps surprisingly, Pietro, or whichever grim-faced functionary was managing the logistics of the murder, agreed. It was a small, seemingly merciful concession, but it probably served their purposes. A hysterical, screaming duchess was difficult to transport. A grieving, resigned one was far more manageable. Keep the victim calm. It's just good PR for an assassination. That last night must have been an agony of love and despair. Leonora would have clung to her baby's cradle, her tears falling on the infant who would grow up without a mother. This tiny child was the only pure and good thing to have come from her disastrous marriage, a small, living piece of her that she was about to leave behind forever. It's a moment of pure operatic tragedy, a scene of quiet human devastation amidst all the political scheming and violent retribution. She was saying goodbye, not just to her own life, but to the future she would never see, the son she would never watch grow up. The next day, the carriage arrived. Her escorts were not friendly courtiers. They were grim, stony-faced men who probably slept in their armor for fun. They were there to ensure she reached her destination, and their stoic silence would have been more terrifying than any threat. The journey to the villa was a slow, deliberate funeral procession. To maintain the facade of a pleasant country trip, and to keep her compliant, her guards humored her along the way. They allowed her to make stops, to prolong the inevitable journey just a little bit longer. She asked to stop at a church to pray, a final appeal to a God who seemed to have abandoned her. Then, in a moment of poignant and heartbreaking symbolism, she asked to stop to pick flowers. Imagine this young woman, knowing she was just hours from a violent death, pausing in a field to gather a bouquet. It was a small act of defiance, a final fleeting connection to the beauty of a world she was about to leave. Her guards let her. After all, when you're escorting someone to their death, You want them to be as happy as possible. It makes the whole sordid business so much tidier. As the carriage rumbled through the Tuscan countryside, the green hills and picturesque olive groves must have seemed like a cruel joke. This beautiful landscape, a place of life and vitality, was the backdrop for her impending death. Finally, the Villa Medicea di Cafaggiolo came into view. It was a formidable-looking place, more of a fortress than a country retreat, with imposing towers and thick stone walls. It was a place designed for defense and control, a perfect, isolated stage for what was about to happen. As they approached, a heavy, unnatural silence seemed to hang over the entire estate. The carriage pulled up to the main gate, and the stark reality of the situation became terrifyingly clear. There was no welcoming party, no bustling staff rushing out to greet the Duchess. The windows were dark and empty. The usual sounds of a grand household, the chatter of servants, the clatter of the kitchens, the barking of dogs, were completely absent. The villa was a ghost house, deliberately emptied for the occasion. There was just Leonora, her silent escorts, and the echoing sound of her own bad decisions. This wasn't a health retreat, it was a slaughterhouse that had been cleared for the next kill. The moment the carriage stopped, her escorts disembarked and helped her down. Their job was done. They didn't enter the villa with her. They simply turned around, got back into the carriage and left, leaving her standing alone in the vast, empty courtyard. The great wooden gates swung shut behind them with a deafening, final thud. That sound would have sealed it. Any lingering, desperate hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding would have evaporated in that moment. She was alone, trapped. The reality of her situation, stark and brutal, finally set in. She stood there for a moment, a solitary, tragic figure in the courtyard of her own tomb. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The walls were too high, the gates were locked. The only way to go was forward, into the silent, waiting house. With a resolve born of pure despair, she turned and walked towards the main entrance. She climbed the stone steps, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside, into the suffocating silence of the Villa of Doom, to keep her final, fatal appointment. Inside the silent villa, Leonora climbed the grand staircase, her mind a whirlwind of terror. She opened the master chamber door. Pietro leapt from behind the velvet curtain, dagger flashing. With brutal efficiency, he stabbed his young wife, then screamed, "Pietro's tooth!" No one knows what it meant. After a brief, tearful breakdown, he shoved her body into a pre-ordered coffin. The final act in the Villa of Doom was complete. Think a Medici murder is dark? The real pros were in Rome, where assassination was an art, disguised as a dinner party. The Vatican, ruled by the Borgias, was a stage for power, poison, and ambition. Their business model? Invite a wealthy cardinal to dinner, poison him, and seize his fortune. For Cardinal Adriano, this dinner would be his last. Meet our dinner guests: Pope Alexander VI, the cunning host, his son Cesare Borgia, the ruthless operations manager, and Cardinal Adriano, tonight's intended victim. The Borgias see a fortune to seize, but Adriano isn't naive. He knows this invitation is deadly. Yet he's not defenseless. The Cardinal has a plan of his own, and tonight he's ready to play his ace. The dinner proceeds as these things usually do. There's polite conversation, discussions of theology and military campaigns, all lubricated with copious amounts of wine, which the Cardinal is probably only pretending to sip. The tension in the room must have been thick enough to carve. The Borgias are all smiles and bonhomie, radiating a sort of predatory warmth. The Cardinal is a picture of calm deference, betraying none of the frantic calculations going on inside his head. He's waiting for the main event, the part of the evening where the hospitality traditionally turns lethal, and it always happens at dessert. Finally, the moment arrives. The servants clear the main course and bring out the sweet finale, a dish of creamed fruit. It looks delicious. It's fancy, it's expensive, and it's almost certainly laced with a lethal dose of cantarella, the Borgias' signature poison. This was their calling card, a secret family recipe often said to be a derivative of arsenic. It was tasteless, odorless, and brutally effective. The poisoned dish would, of course, be served exclusively to Cardinal Adriano, while the Pope and his son would receive identical but entirely wholesome portions. It was a simple, elegant, and well-practiced plan. As the plates are set down, Cesare flashes a triumphant grin. The Pope leans back, looking like a contented python who's just about to swallow a goat. This is the moment of victory. In a few minutes, the Cardinal will start to feel a bit off, complain of stomach cramps, and then keel over in agony. There will be a brief theatrical display of shock and sorrow from the Borgias, and then they can get down to the business of seizing his assets. It's a flawless plan they've executed countless times before. What could possibly go wrong? But Cardinal Adriano doesn't pick up his spoon. Instead, he looks directly at Cesare Borgia, his expression one of mock innocence. He knows what's in the dish. He can probably smell the faint, ghostly scent of his own demise. But instead of panicking, he decides to call them out. He stands up, gestures to the dessert, and basically says, "Your Holiness, your Grace, is this your subtle way of telling me my earthly affairs are concluded?" It's a bold move, a direct challenge. He's letting them know that he knows. The game is afoot and the Cardinal is about to make his move. Normally, this is the point where the Cardinal would be dragged off to a back room, but not today, because Cardinal Adriano, as we've mentioned, had a plan. He knew that the Borgia's method relied on a trusted servant, a cupbearer or a chef, to administer the poison. So, before arriving at the dinner, the Cardinal had a little chat with the Pope's head cook. This chat probably involved a very large bag of gold coins, and a promise of an even larger one if the cook survived the night. He made the cook an offer he couldn't refuse. He bribed him. The plan was simple genius. The Cardinal instructed the bribed cook to prepare the poisoned dessert as ordered by Cesare. However, when it came time to serve, the cook was to perform a little switcheroo. The clean, unpoisoned portion intended for the Pope was to be given to the Cardinal, and the deadly arsenic-laced portion intended for the Cardinal. That was to be split and served to Pope Alexander and his son Cesare. It was the ultimate Uno reverse card, a stunning act of culinary betrayal that turned the assassins into the victims of their own plot. So, back at the dinner table, as the Pope and Cesare are chuckling at the Cardinal's gallows humor, they tuck into their dessert with relish. They assume his comment is just the last witty remark of a condemned man. They savor the sweet, creamy fruit, completely oblivious to the fact that they are eating their own murder weapon. The Cardinal, meanwhile, carefully eats his own portion, knowing it's perfectly safe. He's just sitting there, watching them poison themselves, probably trying his best not to break into a massive, triumphant grin. It's a moment of supreme, ice-cold revenge. It doesn't take long. The poison gets to work with horrifying speed. Suddenly, the Pope's face goes pale. He clutches his stomach and lets out a strangled cry. "Cornetto, I am poisoned!" he screams, his eyes wide with the horrifying realization of what has just happened. He's been beaten at his own game, outplayed by the man he was trying to kill. Cesare, too, is writhing in agony, the poison coursing through his veins. The hunters have become the hunted, and the dinner party has descended into a screaming, writhing chaos of their own making. The scene in the Vatican that night must have been one of utter pandemonium. The Pope is screaming, Cesare is collapsing, and Cardinal Adriano is probably trying to look shocked, while discreetly slipping out the back door before anyone thinks to ask him any difficult questions. Pope Alexander VI, being an old man, stood no chance. The poison ravaged his system, and after several days of excruciating agony, he died. The great Borgia Pope, the master of intrigue and poison, was undone by a bowl of fruit and a disgruntled, well-paid chef. It was a fittingly ironic end. Cesare Borgia, however, was younger, stronger, and tougher. He was in absolute agony, so sick that his skin was reportedly peeling off his body, but he managed to survive. Legends say he had himself submerged in the bloody carcass of a disemboweled bull, hoping the animal's vitality would counteract the poison. While that's probably just a bit of dramatic folklore, it paints a vivid picture of his desperate fight for life. He pulled through, but he was a broken man. Just as his father died, his own power base, which depended entirely on the Pope's support, crumbled to dust. The Borgia Empire was over, and Cardinal Adriano, he got away with it. He had played the most dangerous game in Rome and won. He had not only survived, but he had single-handedly brought down the most feared dynasty in Italy. He had his wealth, he had his life, and he had the immense satisfaction of knowing he had served the Borgias a taste of their own medicine, literally. His bold, preemptive strike had reshaped the political landscape of the entire Italian peninsula. It was a masterclass in Renaissance survival. When invited to a dinner party where you are the main course, make sure you befriend the chef. This whole episode serves as a brutal reminder of the world we're dealing with. It's a world where popes are murderers, cardinals are counter-assassins, and dessert is the most dangerous course of the meal. The story of the Pope's poisoned supper is more than just a lurid tale. It's a perfect illustration of the ruthless, high-stakes reality of power in Renaissance Italy. It proves that no one, not even the Vicar of Christ himself, was safe. And it sets the stage perfectly for our next scene, the confession of the man who actually made the poison. Fast forward to 1504, a sweltering Roman night. Two men dressed as monks creep through the city, not for prayers, but for a midnight house call. They visit Balatrone, a dying man in a stifling slum, whose secrets about a poisoned supper are about to spill. Balatrone, racked with guilt and fear, confesses he was the Vatican's poison chef, the man behind the Borgia's deadly desserts. The monks aren't just there for his soul. They want the truth about a letter, a dinner, and a murder that changed history. As Balatrone confesses, the older monk reveals himself. He's Pope Julius II, undercover, seeking the recipe that killed his predecessor. Balatrone realizes too late. His confession is not for forgiveness, but for the new Pope's own arsenal. Julius demands the recipe. Balatrone, desperate, gasps out, "Pig spit and arsenic!" The infamous Cantarella. Julius leaves, mission accomplished, abandoning the dying chef to his fate. No absolution, just another secret for the Vatican vault. Renaissance Italy, where art, murder, and absurdity collide. Behind every masterpiece lurked a plot, a poison, or a punchline. These stories remind us history's greatest figures were as flawed, ruthless, and ridiculous as any of us. Survival tips for Renaissance Italy: decline Medici invitations, never eat Borgia desserts, and trust no one, not even the Pope. In a world of daggers and double crosses, the only certainty was danger, and the only winners were the most cunning. Power, then as now, is a corrupting force. The Medici and Borgia bought impunity, turning lives into pawns in a ruthless game. Leonora wasn't a schemer, just a lonely woman whose desires became a crime. History isn't a fable. It's murder, Medici, and poison, a show you never saw but won't soon forget. The Tudor court, a grand stage for ambition, and for endings. It glittered, oh yes, with jewels, with smiles sharp as daggers. Here, a queen was a role, a temporary position mostly. One wrong step, one barren year, and the trapdoor opened.
His royal appetite was legendary, not just for banquets, you understand, but for fresh hope, a new womb to carry his legacy. He collected wives like some men collected hawks. Each one, he swore, was the love of his life, until she wasn't, or until she failed to deliver the required male child, a spare for the heir.
Henry, a man of God, he said, defender of the faith, yet he broke with Rome for a woman, for Anne Boleyn. Then he broke Anne Boleyn, her head neatly severed, all for a son. The quest consumed him. It twisted him from a golden prince into something bloated, suspicious, something dangerous. England held its breath with each new queen. Would this one last? Would this one provide the boy? The pressure was immense. A kingdom's future, they said, rested in the royal nursery. More accurately, it rested on a woman's ability to please the king, in bed and in birthing. A grim lottery with the highest stakes. Then came Jane. Jane Seymour. Quiet Jane. She slipped into the king's view like a soft shadow, so different from Anne, the fiery, clever Boleyn. Jane was plain, they whispered, submissive. Her motto, bound to obey and serve. How convenient for a king tired of arguments. The path to the throne was slippery with blood and tears. Jane Seymour was not one for grand pronouncements, or for much talking at all, really. She navigated the treacherous currents of court life with a quiet determination. Her eyes, often downcast, missed little. Unlike the brilliant, sharp-tongued Anne, Jane offered a placid surface. A haven, Henry thought, from the storms of his previous marriage. He saw obedience, a gentle nature. He saw a vessel for his son.
Jane understood her role. She was to be the mother of a prince. Her desires, her fears, were secondary, if they existed at all in the king's mind. He preferred his women simple, or at least appearing so.
But Jane was not entirely alone. She had Agnes, her nurse. Agnes Roper, a woman carved from sterner stuff, not a lady of the court with its silks and whispers. Agnes was bedrock, solid, unyielding. She had been with Jane since she was a child, a fierce protector, Her loyalty to Jane was absolute.
Agnes saw the court for what it was, a nest of vipers, with the largest viper wearing the crown. She had no illusions about Henry, his charm, his piety, all a veneer, she thought. Underneath, there was only appetite, and a chilling disregard for the women he professed to adore.
Their bond was a silent thing, mostly, forged in shared moments, away from prying eyes. Jane, with her gentle hesitations. Agnes, with her blunt assessments. In a world of shifting loyalties and false smiles, Agnes was her one constant. Jane's belly grew, a visible sign of hope, or of impending doom if things went awry. The kingdom buzzed, prayers were offered, astrologers consulted. Henry, usually restless, became a man obsessed. He hovered, he fussed, he issued decrees about Jane's diet, her exercise, the very air she breathed. His anxiety was a palpable thing. It filled the royal apartments like a suffocating fog.
He needed this son, not just wanted, needed, to secure his dynasty, to prove his manhood perhaps, to silence the ghosts of his past failures.
Jane, pale and burdened, carried the weight of it all. Then the pains began. October. A cold, damp Hampton court. The birthing chamber was prepared. Solemn physicians gathered, whispering in Latin. Midwives bustled, their faces grim. This was women's business mostly, but the king's presence loomed large, even when he wasn't in the room. 2 days, then 3. Jane's quiet endurance began to fray. Her cries, muffled at first, grew sharper. The air grew thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and fear. Each spasm, each wave of agony, was a reminder of the brutal bargain she had made. A crown for a child, her life for his. The physicians, for all their learned books, were often helpless. Childbirth was a battlefield. Many women did not survive, especially not royal women, whose confinements were often more public, more pressured. Henry paced outside. His impatience grew with every passing hour. He demanded updates. He sent messages. The boy was born. Edward, a prince. Healthy, they said. Henry had his son, his triumph. He wept, they said, tears of joy, of relief. He held his son aloft, a future king. But in the birthing chamber the joy was muted. Jane lay dying, the price of his triumph. She had done her duty, she had given him his heir, and now she was expendable. Her quiet life extinguished for his ambition. The room stank of death, not just birth. The king got his prize. Jane got her peace, a cold and silent one.
Agnes the nurse had been there. She had wiped Jane's brow. She had held her hand. She had heard her last faint whispers. When the king finally entered, his face flushed with victory, Agnes stood like a stone sentinel. Her grief was a raw, burning thing. She saw not a relieved father, but a butcher, a man who had sacrificed her Jane on the altar of his ego. He cooed over the infant. He barely glanced at the still form on the bed. The mother, already a footnote in the story of her son. This Agnes could not bear.
She stepped forward. The courtiers gasped. No one spoke to the king like this.
"You have your son, your majesty," Agnes said, her voice low but carrying like a lash. "But at what cost?"
Henry, startled, looked up. His joy faltered.
You speak of cost, woman, he blustered. This is a day of celebration.
Jane was buried with all the pomp a queen deserved, a queen who had done her duty. Henry mourned publicly. He wore black. He spoke of his irreplaceable loss, but the court knew. The search for a new wife would begin soon enough. The royal nursery was secure for now, but kings always needed more sons, more security.
Jane's rooms at Hampton Court were aired out, her belongings catalogued. Life, as it always does in palaces, moved on. Quickly, efficiently, erasing the traces of the recently departed. Agnes lingered, tasked with sorting some of Jane's personal effects, a grim task, each folded gown, each small trinket, a fresh stab of pain.
In a dusty corner of a disused antechamber, she found it. An old spinning wheel, not grand, not gilded, made of dark, age-worn wood. It looked out of place amongst the royal finery. It hummed with a strange energy, as if it had been waiting. Agnes felt a chill. It was not a piece Jane had ever used, not to her knowledge. It seemed ancient, imbued with stories.
Spinning wheels, tools of women, symbols of domesticity, of patience, of weaving fates, but also in old tales, instruments of curses. Think of Sleeping Beauty, a pricked finger.
Years spun by, as relentless as any wheel. King Henry VIII, the great king, he married again and again and again. Anne of Cleves, lucky to escape with her head. Catherine Howard, not so lucky. Then Catherine Parr, who managed to outlive him. But the son he craved, Edward, remained his only legitimate male heir, a fragile reed upon which to build a dynasty.
Henry's triumph with Jane Seymour had been singular and costly, more costly than he knew at the time. Or perhaps deep down he did. His body began to betray him. The golden prince of his youth vanished, replaced by a mountain of flesh, grotesquely fat. His leg, an old jousting wound, festered. It oozed, it stank, he roared in pain, he raged at his physicians. His temper, always fearsome, became monstrous.
He saw enemies everywhere. He signed death warrants with a trembling hand, the tower filled with those who displeased him, or those he merely suspected. The court, once vibrant, became a place of fear. Whispers followed him, not of admiration, but of his decline, his decay.
Did he remember Jane? In the long, sleepless nights, did her gentle face appear to him? Did he hear Agnes's words echoing in the silent chambers?
May her ghost haunt your every waking moment.
He was haunted, certainly, by pain, by paranoia, by the ghosts of all those he had wronged, his wives, his friends. So, Henry VIII, the great king, he got his son. But what a legacy he left, a legacy of bloodshed, of broken vows, of religious turmoil. He tore England apart to get his way, to satisfy his desires. He thought himself a titan, a god, almost. But he was just a man, a flawed, frightened man, terrified of his own mortality, terrified of being forgotten. He is remembered, oh yes, but not always as he would have wished. His grand narrative, carefully constructed, has cracks, dark, unsettling cracks. And the irony? Oh, the delicious irony. He moved heaven and earth to secure a male heir, to bypass his daughter Mary, to ensure a king would follow him. And what happened? Edward, his precious boy, reigned for a mere 6 years. A sickly child, he faded quickly. And then? Mary took the throne. Bloody Mary, they called her. The Catholic daughter he had spurned. And after her, Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, the child of the woman he had sent to the block. 2 queens, reigning in their own right. His carefully laid plans, all turned to dust. The succession he fought so hard to control, ultimately controlled by the very women he sought to sideline. The nurse's curse, a dramatic flourish perhaps, but it speaks to a deeper truth. Treat women as mere tools, as vessels, as disposable objects, and there will be consequences. Not always supernatural. Sometimes it's just the slow, grinding justice of the world. The universe has a dark sense of humor. It delights in such reversals. The powerful brought low, the forgotten remembered. Agnes, the fierce nurse, spoke a truth that resonated far beyond Jane's deathbed.